Welcome to part 9 of making a dirndl. In the first 8 parts we did all of this and it looks beautiful. But today we're going to make an apron out of this striped fabric, which was my inspiration for the dress in the first place. It's got yellow, pink, and black stripes, and I've got a plan on how that's going to turn out nice. When we get done making the apron, I'm going to decide for sure whether the pink ribbons look better or I've got some black and gold, and those would look nice too. So we can try them both. And anyway, let's get started on the apron. There's lots of different ways to make an apron. This is kind of a traditional one, white, pleated, very crisp and clean looking with the blue especially. Nice pleats that are about 1 or so inches apart. And then this dress, entirely different look. The white apron would have been okay with this, but this green and brown looks awesome and really sets off with this chocolate brown. These are pleats that are about 1.5 inches apart, and that looks nice. And then here's another idea. This is a gathered apron out of gingham check with a bright, cute skirt, and this is from Austria. I think this looks really neat. And then here's another idea. I made this one for my daughter-in-law. I did kind of a shirred apron here with pewter hooks at the end of the apron ties which close it instead of tying it, and then pewter buttons, and I think this looks really neat. But because my fabric today has the stripes in it, I'm going to take advantage of those stripes and kind of fold the pink so that covers up the yellow stripes and kind of make the yellow peek out from underneath, and I think that would be a really neat way to take advantage of the stripe pattern of the fabric. Well, before you start working on the apron, make sure you've got the hem where you really want it to be on your dirndl. I laid my dress out flat, and the bodice is about 16 inches, laying it out flat like this. And I'm going to aim to have my apron a couple inches more narrow than that, so about 12 to 13 inches looks good. I like to have a couple inches of skirt to show on either side. I'm going to cut it twice the length, twice the width of what I measured right here. So 13 times 2 is 26 inches. So I'm going to make a panel 26 inches wide and 20 inches long for my apron. When you're picking up fabric to make a bunch of pleats, either keep your fingers dampened with a cloth, or you can spray some water on your fabric and then you can be able to get a grip on it a little bit easier. Because when it's dry, it's really hard to just pick it up and make it do what you want. So it'll help you a little bit if you'll do that. Keep your fabric moist. Now that I have the pleats pinned in place, I'll take my iron, and I'm just going to iron them in place. I'm going to come through in a few minutes with a pressing cloth and really lock them in. Now that I've cut off the edge of the skirt panel, and I'm going to roll this under once and twice, and then I'm going to stitch it. I'm going to use this double needle to do some nice top stitching along the edges of the apron. I rolled the side edges of the skirt panel over, ironed them in place, and I'm ready to do my top stitching with my double needle. I have 2 black threads going through here, and I'm just going to sew it right now. After I finished turning under the sides, I folded up how much I wanted of the hem, and I ironed it under so the raw edges were under. And then I pressed it in place and pinned it. I'm going to do my double needle again to do the hem. Because I like the look so much of folding it with the pink at the edge of each pleat and kind of hiding the yellow underneath, I decided to top stitch it in place like that, and it'll become kind of part of the design of the apron. After I finished all the top stitching, I pulled all the threads to the back and tied them off, and then I will stick them through the eye of this big needle and bury them into the seam. And I use this pressing cloth, chemically treated pressing cloth, putting in and taking out pleats, and boy did that work. I put it on the apron after I had every pleat pinned and kind of ironed in place, and you dampen this and it just presses in the pleats really, really, really firmly. It looks great, kind of like a little accordion, and so that's going to stay put really nicely, and it'll look really cool. Well, I've cut my apron ties 3.5 inches wide. I want them to be 1 inch wide when I'm finished. So right along this pink, right where the pink and black meet, that's going to be exactly where it's going to fold it. And this is going to be the right side of the apron tie that's going to show. So that means that this side is going to be on the inside of the apron. And so I'm going to take 1 inch of interfacing and I'm going to place it right along the middle line, and so that it goes out 1 inch. And I'm going to reinforce the center of the apron ties with that. It'll be mostly around the waistband where it connects to the skirt. For the apron ties, what I do is the waist I have is about a 34 waist, so that's for the waist. And then we need 30 inches again for one of the ties, and we need 30 inches again for the second tie. So I think the ties for total should be 60 inches plus the waist. I had to piece my striped fabric together to make continuous ties, and so I'm really being careful to match up the stripes. So I'm going to do that now. I have several seams to sew to make my ties. I cut a piece of interfacing 1 inch wide, and mine just happens to be 20 inches long, and I'm going to sew it. This is going to be put on the back side. I'm going to come through and stitch it in place. Then I'm going to lay this panel that I made for the skirt on top of it and center it, and I'm going to draw a line from here to here and do the same on the other end to mark exactly where the apron ties will be and where it'll be sewn to the skirt pattern, and that'll make it really easy when it comes time to do the apron. I marked where the edge of the apron is on this side and on this side, and you will see later on when we flip it over, it's going to be so handy to do this. Okay, I lined up this line which I previously drew, lined it up with the edge of the skirt panel, and I lined it up exactly along this line, which you could draw on, measure or whatever, and it's pinned right exactly on the back side where I want, and again this ends on this side. So I'm going to go and I'm going to stitch this, and when I start it, I'm going to start back a little ways, go backwards, and zip all the way over this way. And when I get to the line, I'm going to go backwards again to kind of lock it in to make sure it won't ever rip out. Now as I approach this second line over here that I drew, I'm going to go to the line and stop, and then I'm going to go backwards, and that again kind of locks it in so that later on it won't rip out. Now that I've sewn the apron ties on, I'm going to lay it down flat and kind of fold the apron panel up so that the seam allowance is leaning down, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin it so it won't get in the way, like that. Okay, now I'm going to take the apron tie, and I know that this is the center line right here, right where the pink and the black meet up, and I'm going to fold it right along that line and actually pin it in place, such as that. Now see that line that I earlier drew? I'm going to line that line up exactly with the edge of the apron tie, like this, and pin it in place. Okay. And I'm going to start stitching right along the 1 inch line, which in this case will be right where the pink and the black meet, and we're going to stitch all the way down to the end of the apron ties. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold it along that center line, which is where the pink and the black meet, all the way down, because I want the apron ties to be very nice and straight along that line. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I've got the apron tied, and I'm going to fold the ties up, kind of pin them up out of the way. And then I'm going to fold the apron ties down right along the line in the middle where the black and the pink meet. And my little line that I drew, I'm going to line it up precisely at the edge of the apron panel. Well, I've pinned both apron ties, so now I'm going to flip it over. The reason why I'm doing that is because I can see the stitching where I stitched the apron waistband to the panel, the top of it, and I can see right where that stitching is, and I'm going to put my needle in exactly where the stitching ended, right at that line, and that's where I'm going to start stitching down to the end of the apron ties. I'm ready to start sewing the apron ties, and I've already sewn the apron panel to the waistband, and I'm going to put the needle in right where that line is and where the stitching line from sewing the apron ties to the panel start, and I'm going to sew right straight down to the end of the apron ties. And this is pretty easy for me because I've got the line of the fabric to follow, and if I didn't, then I would probably either mark a piece of tape or something over here and keep an eye on that, and that would tell me where the 1-inch mark is. But my fabric's kind of helping me with this. Sometimes I like to just turn and finish off the tips of the apron ties at an angle. You can do them straight, but sometimes it's kind of fun to do that. So as I get down here to the tip, I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to come, and it's really important when you do these kind of things because you're going to turn it the inside out, or right side out. You've got to trim the extra seam allowance on the corners, especially right up to the stitching, and then you need to grade the seam allowances. So to grade them, I'm going to cut the top layer down to maybe about 1/8 of an inch, and then the bottom layer to maybe 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to do the same with all of the seam allowance all the way up the apron tie. And if you don't do that, you end up with a really bulky, lots of extra fabric inside of the tie. So it takes a little time, but it's worth it to do this.
Room on the dance floor.
Well, I'm about done grading my seam allowance. Now when I get up to that little line that I made, I'm going to stop right there. I'm not going to grade anymore. Just going to stop right there. I've sewn 1/2 of the ties. Now here's the other side. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put my needle in right there where that stitching ends and right where the edge of the skirt panel is. I'm going to sew the second one that same way. Put the needle right in there. Now that I've finished grading the seam allowance, this is what it looks like. The ties are inside out, and this waistband looks like this. So I'm going to go over to my ironing board, and I'm going to fold this seam allowance up like this and iron it in place so that when I get done doing the next step, it'll be ready to flip over and finish off. Now, using a wooden dowel, I'm going to turn the apron ties right side out, and it's going to come right through the opening here in the apron by starting way at the other end. Usually I dampen my fingers a little bit to kind of get a grip on the material, and I kind of pull it apart, kind of pull it open, and tuck the little corner into it as best I can. It takes a little working sometimes to get it going, and then I stick the little wooden dowel in there, and I kind of just pull the fabric down across the wooden dowel until it gets wrinkled up, and pretty much I'm turning the whole thing the right side out. It's kind of satisfying at this point because it's going to pop through in a moment, and all of a sudden you'll see the wooden dowel come through the apron ties opening here, and there it is. The wooden dowel covered with the fabric, the end of the apron ties. So I'm going to pull the wooden dowel out now, holding on to the tip of the apron right here. Pull the wooden dowel out. Got it. And I'm just going to kind of pull this wrinkled up mess of apron tie and just keep pulling. With my left hand, I'm pulling the apron tie out of here. With my right hand, I'm just kind of pulling these little gathered bits. And sometimes it takes a little something to keep pulling on it until it's all done. And as it pops through, now it's going to take me a few minutes to get it all the way through, and then what I've got to do is I've got to iron the apron ties. It took a little while to kind of slowly iron it out so it's all flat. So I ironed the whole thing, and then turning this over, this is the seam allowance that's going to be hidden basically. I folded it in and ironed it down, and I'm going to pin this whole thing in place, being really careful. I'm going to pin it from the front. I'm going to be careful as I pin it through this yellow. I'm going to look in the back and make sure that it catches, and yes it does. And when I come through, I'm going to stitch from one end of the apron tie way down there. I'm going to stitch with yellow thread and go right along this edge line of my apron tie, and it's going to catch that part where I've ironed it on. Now before I start sewing the back of the tie, I'm going to go through and make double sure as I pin all of these areas that I'm going to be sewing. I'm going to look on the back after I pin all of these pins, making sure that I've got it right here in the front just the way I want it. I'm going to flip it over and make sure that I can see each of those pins in the back, and if I did not catch the back of this, then I need to make sure that I move it a little bit, so I will, because it is a big waste of time when you go through and you sew it and you realize that you have to re-sew it because you didn't catch the facing here in the back. So it looks like mine's okay. Of course the apron ties are alright, this part, because we've already sewn them. So the only part we're really concerned about is all the back part that's going to face on the back of the apron skirt. So I'm going to start way at the end of the tie now, sewing the whole length, and the purpose of that is just like top stitching, but it really isn't necessary for the ties at all because they've already been sewn, but it's just nice to start at the end and go on through, just so it has a continuity. Now that I've done top stitching the apron with the yellow, it shows up a little bit if you look really close, and that same stitching caught the back and the whole thing's finished off. That's cool. I can see the yellow when you spin around. It was really cool. I like it, and it's comfortable, and it should fit you till next Oktoberfest. Beautiful wreath.